everyone. Welcome to the Blue Water Climate Control Volquest.com podcast with Brent Hubbs, Jesse Simonton, and Rob Lewis. Brent Hubbs, along with Austin Price. So the whole gang's all here. Glad to have you along with us on this Friday as we'll get to the mailbag in just a couple of minutes. But, Jesse, let's start with you a little bit, your takeaway from what Commissioner Sankey said. We heard from Philip Fulmer earlier in the week. Commissioner Sankey had the teleconference on Wednesday, didn't completely wipe out the notion of spring football practice, although that seems unlikely. Any takeaway you had from Commissioner Sankey's teleconference?
The fact that he didn't want to completely rule out the April 15th restart date, but then immediately acknowledged that the CDC's report that, 6 to 8 weeks, they'd think that the suggestion is to limiting a gathering of less than 50 people. He acknowledged the difficulties of making that a reality in terms of a football practice. And so I think we're all under the assumption that April 15 day is going to come and go. And teams are not going to be practicing. And that's why you're seeing most stories right now and talking to folks and reading stuff. They think that, there's a legitimate chance college football doesn't come back until maybe, July 1st, but perhaps even August 1. And what sort of, difficulty and kind of repercussions does that present? And that's a whole, different, set of conversations of what we're obviously currently having, right now at the middle of March.
Rob, I think it's interesting. I know you've talked to Coach Barnes and the basketball people. There's so much talk about spring football and about football and when's football coming back. You're talking to some basketball folks, they have the same concerns that they may not get any contact with their players until late summer as opposed to maybe early summer at this point. Isn't that kind of the basketball vibe out there?
Yeah, big concern. And, it pales in comparison, obviously, to, what's going on at large. But right now with the season over, this is the time of year when Rick Barnes would be spending, 8 hours a day in the gym with guys just drifting in for individual workouts. Obviously player development is a huge part of this program, and that is very much on hold at the moment. And then just, I know you touched on it, academics. I don't think Tennessee has any guys that they're really concerned about, but what happens on that end, the guys kind of, lose touch, lose focus, and just, simply not being on campus, not being part of the program. It's just the coaches, they understand, obviously, but it's just a very weird place for them to be at, just total disruption.
And Austin, you can sense, Philip Fulmer on Monday did not have a great bit of frustration, although he did acknowledge he would like to have, wishes they would have had better communication with the NCAA. Sankey kind of skirted around that, but did allude to the fact that there was some moments where communication wasn't really good at this point. The problem it seems like everybody's having right now is people want decisions, but what's the timeline to properly make a decision? Whether it's academic waivers, whether it's when you might get back in contact with people, whether it's extra eligibility for student athletes out there as well.
Well, there's just a lot of questions. You're right. Just from the, what do they do about the winter athletes? Obviously, the spring ones kind of make sense. They just got their whole season wiped out. The winter sports seem unrealistic at this point, and then you go into spring football, recruiting, all that stuff, and then you throw in the academics on top of that, and there's just a lot of questions like how realistically can you hold an athlete's feet to the fire when they're used to getting the proper tutoring at the Thornton Center, and all of a sudden that's taken away from them. Now, granted, they still have a chance to do the online work, and probably is a little easier to do an online test than it is to, be sitting there, in the classroom, but at the same time, I just don't know how much, fire you can hold to someone's feet, when they're used to getting a certain standard of assistance. And that's not just here at Tennessee, that's across the board, across college athletics in general. So, and then you throw in the fact that we talked about this the other day, the questions about there are no ACT testing right now, somebody that's a point or two short, how does each school finish the semester? Do they finish it, all in the same way, or are there varying efforts across the landscape where maybe one school says, hey, when we left the classroom, you had a B, you want that B, you can call it a day, or you can continue on and see if you can raise your grade. Does that happen? Who knows how all the questions get answered over the next couple of months? But it just seems like we're a long way away from getting any of those answers.
I do think that Phillip had a very, that was probably one of his better press conferences since he's become Tennessee's athletic director. I thought he had a measured tone, and I thought that, he kind of understood the weight of everything, and that, some of the competitive concerns, whether it be recruiting or extra practice time or whatever, that kind of pales into the importance of both folks staying healthy and kind of, how do we kind of deal with what we know now, but also, kind of answering Hubbs's academic concerns. That's kind of at the forefront of what folks are dealing with. How do these, kids continue to get their education? What happens in terms of, which is still an ongoing question, what happens in terms of, nutrition? Some of these guys are now, the majority of them are off campus. How do they continue to be, properly fed? Many of whom come from backgrounds where that's a difficult proposition. And
I do think it helps, Jesse, though. I do think it helps that they can go and pick up the meals on campus and then take them back to their apartment. That's a huge step, in my opinion.
That's a huge deal. But how many of these kids also have gone home?
Yeah.
And that's right now that we don't know. That it's kind of a floating figure because they are not allowed to go in and, work out at the facilities. Many gyms across the, state and country have been closed as well. So how do you kind of continue to maintain the conditioning and workout stuff that Fitz has done? And again, this is a problem that every school across the country is having to deal with right now, not just Tennessee.
All right, let me ask this question before we get into mailbag questions. Last one. Let's obviously taking away the health and well-being of the student athlete and everybody in general. That's the whole priority, or it better be the whole priority. If you're a coach and you're looking at it from the performance, the development, the stability of your program, what is your biggest concern right now? Is it academics first and foremost? Is it extra eligibility? If you're a coach, is it recruiting? What's the biggest concern question that you have on your mind taking away the general health and welfare?
Well, for me, I would go academics 1, recruiting 2, and then go down the line from there. I think the academic part is something, it's easy to think they're going to rubber stamp this stuff and grant waivers, but it's the NCAA. There are no definites. And then recruiting, like, how does this shape things? Again, you've seen Ohio State get this huge run. I think, there's a notion out there that's being kind of, pointed towards certain recruits. Hey, with this virus, who knows about visits, official visits? And it's not necessarily a scare tactic, but it's to plant a seed of doubt to maybe usher a kid to get into the boat sooner rather than later, which is why Mike had the comments about how he might see a lot of decommitments once, the recruiting stuff gets lifted. But, I think that, just there's so many questions about that, but I would still start with academics because you just never know how all this plays out, and you don't have that constant help of the Thornton Center. There's a difference between online tutoring and tutoring there in the Thornton Center.
Well, there's go ahead. Rob.
I was just going to throw in a pile on the recruiting, specifically on the basketball side. And this is not just Tennessee. Everybody's dealing with it. But Tennessee had 3 big official visits lined up that would have taken place, whenever their season ended. One with Musa Cisse, the big man out of Memphis, 5-star guy, top 10 national player. He was in the works to be on campus, here sometime in March or early April. And he is a guy that is very possibly going to try to reclassify into 2020. So, again, everybody's dealing with it. Does he, and for kids like that are thinking about reclassifying, what does the whole shutdown do to, that whole process? How likely is it that they can get done what they need to get done?
Well, I think another domino effect of this, just in terms of the recruiting world, and Hubbs's piece earlier this week touched on it a little bit with some of the comments from Farrell, but just kind of expanding on it. Yes, I think you may see a bunch of decommitments happen, once, knock on wood, everything returns to normalcy. But I think also if this persists through the summer and you don't have visits, you don't have camps, you're going to see more and more guys jump into some of these bigger schools because they're not going to be reevaluated. There's no tape or other stuff out there. And so they're trying to catch their spot where if you had these camps, both rivals camps and Under Armour camps and whatever, but then specifically team camps, we know it firsthand. The board changes. How many guys in the last 2 or 3 classes has Tennessee decided they wanted based that worked out, personally for guys on their staff? That now is not going to happen, at least to nearly, in terms of the sheer number of athletes getting exposure like that. So I think you're going to see some of these guys jump at spots. And then, what are the kind of domino effect of that? Do they back out later on, or are they kind of, secure an avenue towards, hey, I'm going to at least get a bus ticket now, and then we'll see what happens later?
Yeah, I think that, there's a lot. I'm with you guys. I think the academics, I think they're going to get a relief there. So I think you're going to know you're going to get some help. Now, I think from the academic side, the bigger concern about it is going to be a year from now. If the rule from the academics, as we mentioned in the war room, says, hey, you got to be back on track next May, and these kids don't get mini term or part of summer school to remain on track, because as we know, they use those months to stay on track to begin with. But if you're having to make up because you got a little reprieve from this semester, then that makes that next fall really, really important. And next spring, maybe a heavier academic load for everybody. So I think the academic side is a concern. It may be more on the back end than the front end. I think the recruiting question marks right now, how do you recruit? I mean, we're seeing Kansas doing a virtual junior day. How creative are you going to get with this stuff? How realistic how beneficial is a virtual junior day? Who knows? How you handle that stuff, I think, is going to be really, really, how creative these people get in recruiting to make recruiting work is going to be interesting. And then what do they do with the calendar? What does the NCAA do with the calendar? I think is the other factor that's going to be really interesting for all sports out there. All right, let's get into these. Okay,
I was just going to, my final thought on this, the third piece of this puzzle is just going to be player accountability in terms of players on said teams. Now we're kind of focusing this specifically on football and basketball, but with spring practice being missed, both academically, and then what happens in the summer, this is guys in terms of playbook retention, guys in terms of continuing to work out. It's going to take a lot of personal responsibility, and that's what's going to be pretty fascinating across the country of how many guys show up, back on campus whenever it does happen, knowing all the stuff they're supposed to have known in terms of, testing, retention, just for the playbook and schemes, and then obviously just for the conditioning and the workouts. That's going to be kind of fascinating to see how that unfolds.
Yeah, it wasn't long ago. I mean, it was long ago, but it's not long for me because I'm old now. But I remember years ago, Philip Fulmer being angry. I guess it was in 94. Jeff Smith, who was an offensive lineman, went home for the summer or for part of summer. He's a starter, and he came back, out of shape and was in the doghouse because he had to do all this extra conditioning and ended up not starting that year. Eventually got back into the starting lineup, but that was a senior who you say, what kind of shape he knows what he has to be in. Didn't have the discipline at that point in his life to come back into shape that Philip Fulmer wanted him in. So it's not just about can young players be mature and handle this, but even some of your veteran players who have played a lot, will they have that commitment level, Jesse, that you're talking about in all factors of being a student athlete when somebody's not got their thumb on you all the time, so to speak. All right, let's jump into the questions here. We'll start with Galilee. Robbie says he got called out of retirement. He's hearing Vols are deep in it for Chandler and I guess it's how do you pronounce it?
Musa Cisse.
Cisse. All right. Could they be the first two Vols that the Vols steal? Can the Vols get those guys?
I think Tennessee is deep in it, and I mentioned previously Tennessee had an official visit and works for Cisse, who is trying to reclassify into 2020. I think Tennessee would certainly be interested in that. Obviously, they need a departure from the current roster. I won't be remotely surprised if that happens. In fact, I would kind of expect it to at this point. The only official visit he's taken so far as a junior was to Florida State. I think the Seminoles are in that one, but in talking to some people just this week, it feels like Tennessee is probably more concerned about Auburn, Memphis, Kentucky. Right now, I think it's up in the air just with the hold on recruiting, but I think Tennessee feels like they are very much in the thick of it for Cisse. I've had some people tell me that they think Tennessee may leave for Kennedy Chandler. Now, it's early, and Kennedy certainly has not come out and said that. The nation's top point guard, number 10 prospect in the country. That would be a huge coup. But, he's one of those private school kids that, history shows that, some of those guys have left Memphis in the past, but Tennessee fighting Kentucky, they're fighting Duke. He's taken an official visit to Syracuse. He's been to Florida State, but Tennessee got him on campus last fall. That was huge. And, I'm not going to predict Tennessee gets him right now, but I think they feel really good about where they're at with Kennedy.
I don't think it hurts that he's teammates with Omari Thomas and Jabari Smalls.
Oh, I agree.
And Rob, how would you compare his speed with Jordan Bone? Because watching him play Catholic and B.J. Edwards in the state title game, his ability to get coast to coast in a hurry was impressive.
Oh yeah, I think he's in that class. Now, I don't know if he's as fast as Jordan. I mean, the guy who kind of shattered the some of the testing at the NBA prospect camp last summer, but he can fly, and that's one of the reasons Tennessee loves him. I mean, he can absolutely get up and down.
All right, let's go to Deshaun 13 or Deshaun 13. What does fall camp look like? Do they get extra practices added, and do we see more injuries because of the time off when season starts? Again, all this provided that you get back to the season. Jesse, I'll start with you on that question.
I mean, right now, the current schedule of the calendar is that you can't start practicing for fall camp until August 1. And I think right now there's still so many unknowns. It's too early to say. I would advocate, if teams are back on campus by July, that they add some practices. Now, how strenuous will these practices be? Because of his secondary question in terms of injuries, I would think coaches would be very careful. With so many kids coming off, you don't know exactly what their conditioning level is. But I do think that they would maybe light up some rules in terms of coaches being able to kind of do stuff with the ball, let's say hypothetically sometime in July, if teams are back on campus. What do you think, AP?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you look at, to me, you look at making July, if that, let's say that, everything's back open for business come July 1, I think that would be normally in the middle of a dead period, but I would advocate, and I think a lot of people will advocate for the fact that there'll be no dead period at that point, that you'll be able to recruit, you'll be able to have prospect camps if you want to, you'll be able to, have, recruits on your campus, and then two, I would also say that, you probably ought to make it an extended camp, allow for more practices with, most of college football not getting in, any or very little, spring practice. So, the teams that come out, smell like a rose in that deal are teams like Clemson that started a little bit earlier. They got 9 of their 15 in. Alabama didn't get any in. Tennessee got 2 in. So, I think that you'll see significant rule changes just based off of, the year and the circumstance that we're presented with right now.
Yeah, I think they're going to let them go back with some formal stuff, maybe not in pads, but I think they'll let coaches get involved with players in July with some skill development stuff, at least, along with conditioning. If everything is somewhat back to normal, we're back on campuses in July. I think you have to open up that window there. But again, if you open up the recruiting window there, now you got a heck of a challenge for coaches to manage. So again, all of this is unknown. We'll have to see what happens with that moving forward. Let's go to Ironvall. I'm going to start with his bonus question. AP or Jesse, each recruiting class, you usually have a guy who's kind of the important guy for the class for peer recruiting, perception, being a leader in the class, whatever. Last year, a lot of people thought that guy was Keyshawn Lawrence. Get him in the boat. Some other guys would follow. He was a big part of the recruiting deal. According to Ironball, who's the prospect for 21 for Tennessee in that regard? Is there a guy out there?
I don't know if I don't think Tennessee's going after Tennessee likes Caden Salter, but I don't think he would have any say with a lot of the recruits that Tennessee's in on. He's a Texas kid. And, of course, Tennessee, while they want to still recruit nationally, they're still going to recruit regionally most of all.
Is there a North Carolina kid that if you got one of those, look, we see what Mac's doing over there. Not sure you can slow that train down. But if you got a Dilworth or you got one of these guys to jump in North Carolina, Austin, was there enough relationship ties there that could help you in that state with others?
Maybe a Jabari Ritzy. Isaac Washington's got a pretty good personality to him. In the state of Tennessee, I'm not sure they're there is one set guy because everything's so spread out in 2021.
I also
Junior
just don't think some of these
Ju-
guys have that personality.
Yeah, Junior Colson's a quiet kid. Walker Merrill, much the same. You look at William Griffin, then Dietrich Pennington. I mean, none of those guys are big personalities, whereas Keyshawn was a big personality. Obviously, Tyler could command a room. And then, of course, anytime you have a big-time quarterback, I think that helps. Not that I think, Harrison landed a bunch of recruits in this past year. They came here because he was here. But I do think that he was able to have substantial conversations with kids and help in that regard. I don't think you necessarily get that with anybody in this 2021 class as of now. Now, it could change. Somebody could morph. I mean, every year somebody becomes more of a leader on their high school football team than they ever thought they could be the year before. So who's to say that can't happen in a recruiting class?
Yeah, maybe a guy like Elijah Howard can emerge as that voice. But again, I think it's just going to be hard. I'm in agreement with AP. I don't think there's an obvious alpha in the 21 class for Tennessee in terms of a personality, a cult of personality that kind of gets guys together. Again, last year I think they had more than one. I mean, this poster identified Keyshawn, but Harrison certainly had a voice behind the scenes. As AP said, Tyler Barron, even though he waited until the umpteenth hour to commit.
Cooper was around all the time.
Yeah, Tyler and Cooper were big-time presences behind the scenes. And so, obviously, you saw the domino effect with the three Whitehaven kids. So I don't see that,
I think anytime you can have a local
21.
kid, or two that can, hey, come to campus, so-and-so just came in today, and they got a 10-minute drive over, I think that helps. There's nobody in Knoxville for this 2021 class. Like Elijah Howard's at least an hour away. The two kids at Bradley Central. I continue to hear things like Auburn and North Carolina for those kids. So Tennessee, I think if they're going, want to go down that road with Javin Burke or Trey Curry, they need to, up the pressure a little bit. Those kids are 45 minutes to an hour away. So, again, it was always really easy when Cade was a recruit. It's been easy when Cooper and Tyler have been here for them to come over, to run over and help, host a kid who's part of the class. There's nobody in this class for 2021.
Yeah. All right. Iron Ball's other question. Rob, jump on in here too as well. What's your favorite UT storyline of all time? Could be a feel-good story, a game that brings back some nostalgia, happiness from childhood. For instance, the Iron Balls is Chris Lofton fighting off cancer and still being able to be a heck of a player. I'm going to use this as a segue here to kind of promote this. We had this in the War Room. Starting Monday, we're going to do a weekly podcast where we travel down the road of some old games and tell some stories behind the scene of the old games, but also break down some things in those old games. We're going to watch 12 games, thanks to LWS Vol putting them all on YouTube for us. We're going to watch 12 old games, and we're going to come back and break them down and kind of talk about the significance of those wins, some behind-the-scenes stuff, what you saw in those games. So that's something that we're going to do each Monday over the course of the next 12 weeks. I think you guys are really going to enjoy that. For me, in terms of stories I've written, I won't say storyline, but the three stories that I've written since I've been at Volquest that have always resonated with me and have continued with was the story I wrote on Kevin Simon and what he overcame with the knee injuries and fighting through that, the loss of his brother Ken, and the significance of that in his life and what the motivation he had from the loss of his brother for his football motivation and well as his recovery from his knee injury. Obviously, the Inky Johnson story, Rob, stands out to me as well. And then one of my favorites will always be the feature I wrote about Wes Brown and just what playing football at Tennessee, specifically Tennessee, meant to Wes Brown. That's always going to be three of my favorites that I've written.
This was you were around, but this was before my time at Volquest. But I think just favorite storylines for me, off the top of my head, I have to think about Peyton coming back for his senior year. That was pretty significant. I mean, obviously it didn't work out the way he had hoped, but he was already going to be a Tennessee legend, but that pretty much cemented his place, on Tennessee's Mount Rushmore, I think.
Yeah, I think that one was certainly a huge one. Austin, anything for you?
There's a lot of good stories, a lot of good games. I think 05 LSU, to me, that one will always stand out because it was such a different atmosphere that night. First game after Hurricane Katrina, and everybody remembers, the LSU fans busting out the windows on Tennessee's team bus and, Tennessee's miraculous rally behind Rick Clausen after Eric Caines is, Ole over the shoulder there going around the goalpost. And, that one, to me, that was as good a comeback as I've seen. Just, based off the circumstance, the atmosphere you're playing in. I mean, think about it. The Saints played their first game after Hurricane Katrina, and they snowballed that win over the Falcons. Things could have easily snowballed on Tennessee, and it sure looked like it was going to, and they were able to come back and prevail behind Gerald Riggs and Rick Clausen.
Yeah, that game actually is going to be one of our nostalgia games that we travel back through in the 12 Mondays that we do that. But certainly that's a store or a game that if you find it online, you kind of find yourself watching it for an extended period of time. All right, let's get rolling on some more questions here. I'm going to kind of combine VFL 84 and Bassmaster Vols question, and that is recruiting momentum, any kind of traction with some higher-ranked recruits to get things going. All this is kind of in a shutdown mode right now. Ohio State, as you mentioned, Austin has had a run. Does Tennessee have any momentum that you feel like they're there with anybody right now?
Yeah, I think Tennessee's got a lot of momentum with Walker Merrill. I think they've got a lot of momentum with Jalen Wright. And then, I think the best thing that could have happened to Tennessee, because, again, he was getting ready to go to Ohio and Ohio State, and that got canceled, was, getting, Hudson Wolf on campus right there before the dead period started, and, being able to, be the last thing that he saw, for the next, month or two. I think that's big. And so I'm not saying Tennessee's going to get Hudson, but I think that they were kind of on the outside, and now I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. I think they're very much in it for the big rangy tight end. And Jesse, we saw him that day when he walked in the complex. He is a specimen and long.
Yeah, I mean, but he's a guy that I think Tennessee. Tennessee needs to land Hudson Wolf. Position of need, in-state kid. He's been on campus a bunch of times. He's told us multiple times in interviews, that he grew up a Vol fan. Now he has also been very clear that, that's not going to overwrite some sort of final decision. But the fact that Tennessee got his final visit for what could be several months, he has started to develop a relationship there with Joe Acevet. Got to like Tennessee's chances there. The fact that Tennessee, again, they were able to stymie kind of some of Georgia's momentum with Ritzy, a guy that AP has noted that is very high on the board. I know Peyton Page, Tennessee continues to recruit there, but, Ritzy and Isaac Washington, and they now have Washington back in the fold, this staff covets just as hard, if not more. And so the fact that, they were the last team to get Ritzy on campus. Tennessee was the last team to kind of get FaceTime with some of those PA kids who, again, I think they're trailing for some of those guys, but for the Vols to kind of be in the mix there, I think that's important as we kind of enter several months of uncertainty. So I'm not sure that Tennessee's going to get a commit in the next, week or two like Ohio State's been popping, but I think they like where they stand with some guys in this class.
All right, Bronco Vol wants to know, where are Breedlove, Huey, and Ruben on the defensive backboard?
I think Breedlove's down the board a little bit, and so is Huey.
All right. Let's go to Jake Dog 13, who all is on the running back board, and where does Tennessee stand with Kody Brown? Austin, I'll start with you. Jesse, you can jump in there as well.
I think Tennessee's in a good spot with Kody Brown. By no means is it done. He was wanting to take all of his official visits this summer. Obviously, now that doesn't look like that will happen. So how does his recruitment change? Does he still take all of his official visits, or does he feel comfortable enough with a particular school to want to get into the boat somewhere? I think it's Tennessee or Auburn for Kody Brown at this point. And I think Tennessee's also, like I said earlier, in a good spot with Jalen Wright, who's a track star out of North Carolina, got a great film, can really pick him up and put him down from a speed standpoint. Outside of that, they would love to get LJ Johnson on campus, the young man from Texas, big-time running back, a top 50 player nationally. He was set to come in at the end of the month. Obviously, that's put a halt on, that with the coronavirus. So, again, Tennessee set to get visits with several big-time guys. Dilworth was supposed to come back the 1st of April. Obviously, LJ Johnson was coming in. Not getting those kids in. How does it affect Tennessee and their ability to be a major player in the recruitment of certain kids? I think it could really put a damper on some of the chances going forward, unless maybe they can get back to July 1. But at that point, you're going to have so many schools clamoring for these kids to come there. You're going to find out real quick how important a school is to a prospect.
All right, let's go go ahead.
I was just going to add too on the running back board specifically. Tennessee they're in a good spot with Jalen Wright. With Evan Pryor committing to Ohio State earlier this week, I think you're going to see some dominoes in terms of the top running backs across the country in terms of numbers and how they shake out. Yeah, Georgia, whether it's Donovan Edwards, they're looking at Travion Henderson. Tennessee would have liked to be in that Travion Henderson conversation, but they have obviously pivoted hard because they did get Kody Brown on campus. They have maintained a strong relationship there. So if Tennessee's able to land Wright and Cody Brown, I think that's a pretty good 1-2 punch.
I think that's a great 1-2 punch, and they complement each other.
And Cody's a guy who I think, has a chance to kind of continue to rise. I mean, he plays for a really good team, or he plays, for a high level in Georgia. And so, he's close to that kind of blue chip back that they've been looking for.
Yeah, the thing I like about Kody too, Austin, as well, is the fact that he doesn't have to carry the freight the entire time for that team. They have a complement there, guy. So I don't think he's going to be a guy who has some stupid number of carries by the end of his senior year, which I think is good for any college out there recruiting a running back.
Yeah, and again, he's got enough speed, but just incredibly tough to tackle and tough to get down. And you're right, Jesse. He plays on a really good high school team there at Parkview. They lost in the semifinals to Marietta and Harrison Bailey this past year. And as a couple of different 7A coaches told Brent and I when we were down in Atlanta last month, they're probably the favorite to win 7A this coming year.
And he's already over 200 pounds, which we know that's what Jeremy wants.
Yeah, he's a big back for sure. All right, I Heart Vols wants to know, there are probably too many unknowns on UT's coaching staff to be able to rank them versus the rest of the league. But whose staff in the league do you think will be most improved this year, and whose staff will take the biggest step back? Also, how do you think Scott Cochran's move to UGA will affect Georgia and Alabama? Rob, I'll start with you.
On Cochran?
Just start on Cochran. What do you think of that move, and how big an impact does it have on Georgia and Alabama?
I think you look at what Alabama's done. I'm not saying somebody else can't come in there, but, we know how important all these coaches view their strength guys. I think that's pretty significant. Just the fact that you're starting over. Now, I'm sure Saban, has a pretty ironclad idea of what kind of program he wants in place. But, golly, it's hard to ignore, you make the jokes about, deer antler spray or whatever, but Alabama has been outstanding in that phase of their program, the whole time Saban's been there. So it's hard for me to think that that's not a blow.
All right, let me ask you this. I want to ask this question a different way because I'm with iHeart Vols. I don't think you can say who's going to take the biggest step back. Who do you think is the biggest unknown staff in the conference for this fall, provided we're playing football? Is it Sam Pittman? Is it Mike Leach adjusting to the SEC? Who's the biggest unknown staff-wise when you look at who they put together? Which program has the biggest unknowns going into this season?
Well, I think Sam has built a nice staff at Arkansas, but I put this on the board 2 days ago, guys. And AP, see if you agree with me. I think every new coaching staff in the SEC, the guys that took over, Kiffin, Pittman, Leach, Drinkowitz, all these guys, I think they face a major uphill battle in year one. And I would not be surprised if every single one of those guys gets an extra year added to their contract at some point, because I think it's going to be a lost season for them. The fact that they're missing so much, whether it's spring practice, all the offseason, summer work, who knows when we get back together. I think it's going to be a major challenge for these new coaches in year one, which is why Tennessee, if you look at it from their perspective, they have obviously they've had a ton of staff movement, but the continuity with the same two coordinators, and you're probably looking at Jarrett Garantano as a fifth-year quarterback. I think that's why you may see some folks actually say, hey, the Vols may actually climb up in some of these power ratings because they return so much.
I think Leach
I agree with that.
I was just going to say, I think Leach and Kiffin are fascinating. I don't know if they face the biggest challenge, but I think injecting those two personalities in this league just makes it a lot more fun.
I think Brent brings up a good point about just Leach being in this league. It's one thing to compete, at an obscure school in the Pac-12. It's one thing to compete, in the Big 12 at Texas Tech and kind of an obscure school. But, to try to do this at Mississippi State in the SEC West, I just think that's I think he'd stand a better chance if he rolled into Vanderbilt. I really do. The East is weaker. I think it's just that's going to be really tough. But Jesse brings up a great point with the fact that all these new coaches, I mean, the first time they can really go out and do a spring evaluation, they're not going to be allowed to not have a spring practice. I mean, this is it's almost like every one of these new coaches that he's talking about, they're almost like a new high school that starts playing JV for a year before they get to a varsity schedule. That's how I would view this next season for those schools, because that's what it's kind of like. I mean, it's going to be, trial by error. I mean, a lot of those schools, and it's not like they landed some, awesome class that's going to come in and set the world on fire. They, much like Pruitt and them did, they kind of took some reaches. So we'll be interested to kind of see how all that plays out. But, I think Jesse brings up a good point in that.
Oh, I think it's a great point. And I don't know if they're going to get an extra year on the contract or not, but I think your comparison to almost playing like a JV deal, working your way in, is going to sort of be what it's like for some of those sports. I mean, I look at a guy like Mel Tucker, who got late to from Colorado to Michigan State. He hasn't installed anything at Michigan State yet. I mean, how far behind are they going to be? Same with these other coaches in the SEC as well. All right, LF Vol, as we run through the last few questions here, of the elite outside linebackers we're on, who are the two best Tennessee's position for? Any of those guys expected to make a decision soon? Jesse, I'll let you take this one.
I mean, they've gotten Junior Colson back on campus. They got Dylan Brooks back on campus. Those are both guys they like. I think they obviously trail Georgia and some other schools for a guy like Judy, but they did at least get some face time with him, and Shelton Felton was able to kind of, start building a relationship there. I would probably start with Colson and Brooks. Brooks is going to be a major battle, I think, with Auburn and Alabama, obviously. And then the last name, AP, is probably Damian Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tennessee's in a good spot with Damian Robinson, but 4 months ago, Brent, I would have said that Tennessee's in a really good spot with Travion Henderson, and then more schools get in play, and more schools are going to get in play for Damian Robinson. I think Colson's one that you take a hard look at, and you got to make a serious run at. He's in your state. It makes a ton of sense. Dylan Brooks, you have natural ties with family here in West Knoxville. And, Jeremy and Ansley have a really good relationship with him. And I think he's more open to leaving that state than most. Now, it's still going to be an uphill climb, and I would still say, if you're taking Tennessee versus the field, you're still definitely taking the field. But I do think that they've got a better shot with him than they probably had with any of these other big-time guys from the state of Alabama the last couple of years. So, those would be the top three. Travali Price would be another one, defensive end to kind of stand-up backer from over in North Carolina I think Tennessee would want to take a hard look at as well. Yeah, and he was supposed to come in. He was supposed to come in the weekend that it all had last weekend. He was supposed to be here last weekend when it all went south.
And then a guy like Munden, can they beat out Georgia and some other schools for him, and Dillsworth, same thing. Now I think both those guys are maybe a little bit more hybrid, inside and outside guys, but there are other names to watch. But I think that the aforementioned trio is probably the top of Tennessee's best chances right now.
All right, James Millis wants to know, how is the university risk planning for a canceled and fanless college football season with regards to missing revenue that the university counts on to fund other activities? I'm going to take this one. We'll move right on real quick. I think everybody's operating right now with the to borrow Sankey saying the glass half full. I don't think anybody has put in or gotten to the point that they're putting in provisions of what happens if we don't have a football season. I don't think anybody has gone down that road yet at any university level, the NCAA level, or at the conference commissioner level. I just think that everybody's waiting to see, but I think we're still down the road from really that becoming the forefront of somebody's thinking and planning at this point. All right, let's go to Vol Ken right quick here. He's got a couple of questions. Are there any players that you guys think will really benefit from the position coaching changes that happen here at Tennessee? Rob, we'll start with you. Anybody benefit from a new tight ends coach, new inside backers coach, or running backs coach, etc.?
I'm not casting aspersions at David Johnson. I mean, I think he did a nice job. But I think Jay Graham, from dealing with him in the past, from seeing what he's done at his stops at Florida State, Texas A&M, I think And again, I'm not saying David Johnson did a bad job. I think that's an upgrade, though, just based on what Jay's gotten done in his career.
Yeah, I think one position, Austin, is, from a personality standpoint, that tight end spot with Brian Niedermeyer leaving and moving over to the other side. Does Asavat maybe like one of these redshirt freshmen a little bit better? Does one of the redshirt freshmen take to his coaching maybe a little bit better? What about a guy like Jacob Warren, who's got a fresh start with a new coach? I wonder about that position a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think anytime you just have a coaching change, anybody that was kind of buried or didn't have a lot of traction sees that as a new lease on life. So I mean, I think the inside linebackers see Brian Niedermeyer's move over there as a chance to, a new start for them. Much like some of those tight ends, the Jacob Warrens. Obviously, you look at a guy like Princeton Fant. Those guys are looking for kind of a big step towards more playing time. And so I think anytime you can get a change, I think everybody kind of gets reinvigorated because I think they feel like they have a new lease. Now, that doesn't change the work habits. That doesn't change some of the reasons they might not have been on the field anyway. But, I do think anytime you have a change that the players get a little more pep in their step because they feel like they've got a clean slate.
All right, I'm going to combine these last two here, or a couple of these last ones here. Volquest wanted to know also about what's the situation now with a guy like Chase Hayden. There's also a question on here about how does this affect guys maybe looking at transferring potentially after spring practice. How much does this affect the transfer market? Jesse, I'll start with you.
I think I think we're hitting pause. But you're seeing guys continue to kind of throw their names into the portal, but right now that portal is like a black hole. I mean, I have no idea when you're gonna, I mean, what Chase Hayden was supposed to visit at the end of March, right? AP.
April 4th.
The end of April. It's the end of March, beginning of April. So obviously now that's not going to happen. I mean, the ramifications I think are continue to be kind of be unknown. What do you think about Chase, AP?
Well, I think that. I talked to Aaron the other day, and at the time it was just kind of not you weren't going to be able to go on practice on campus for spring. Now all of a sudden thought that it may be July 1. I think that changes things for him or anybody. For him or anybody. I mean, now luckily he's got 2 years, so this is not a one-off. Whoever he signs with, whether it's here or somewhere else, they're going to get him for 2 seasons. So I think that's a bonus and a feather in his cap. In my mind, if you're taking a chance on a grad transfer with just 1 year left, what's he been doing during this downtime? Because what if he's kind of gotten himself out of shape, like Brent was talking about with Jeff Smith from 1994? All of a sudden you take a guy and it takes you 6 weeks to get any kind of, real production out of him. Is it worth taking him? Because he's going to count, ahead to the 2021 class or however, depending on whether you have room in the previous class. I mean, he's going to count against your numbers. So I'm interested to kind of see how, all the grad transfer market shifts, over the next couple of months, because if you can't take official visits, you can't go see places unless you've just got a locked in place. I think you're going to be, under the gun, come summertime, because really, I mean, I think in a perfect world, Chase was going to take visits this spring, and then June 1st, he was going to be somewhere, whether that's here or somewhere else. And now all of a sudden, it puts him behind the 8 ball, trying to learn someplace because he's not going to be able to even take a visit for quite a while.
Yeah, Rob, and I was just going to say, I mean, if you do take a grad transfer, you want that guy here as soon as possible. So it's going to put all those guys in a tough spot. They're not going to be on campus for all season workouts until who knows when.
Yeah, I just wonder if guys are hesitant about transferring. And certainly schools are just hesitant about taking a transfer because, again, it's giving up a scholarship and initial in those cases. In many cases, I don't know if coaches are going to be hesitant to that without having a chance to visit with them and get them here for an extended period of time. All right, Vol Lover wants to know this is a great question. Obviously, with Cade Mays, they're going to grant him immediate eligibility, right? With everything that's going through, is there any chance the NCAA says, no, we're not going to give you eligibility for this upcoming year? Don't you think there's
absolutely a chance?
You don't think they get a free pass to those guys?
I agree with you that they should go ahead and rubber stamp and green light these kids. But the fact that they have already come out in the middle of this, crisis and virus and basically said, hey, we're gonna press pause on the whole likeness deal. I mean, because they lost all that money, for March Madness, I nothing surprises me with the NCAA.
Yeah, I agree with this. I mean, like now all of a sudden, because of all that's going on, all the other decisions they're having to make about spring sports and this and that, and you're talking about waivers for academics. Like, how quick are they going to get to Cade's appeal and others? I mean, this is, who knows? I mean, you're right. The easy thing is to rubber stamp, the stuff, but as I said earlier, when I said, when I was talking about the NCAA. From an academic standpoint, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that they're going to see things the same way, most everybody else does.
Hey, we want to thank our friends at Blue Water Climate Control for their continued support of the Volquest.com podcast and what they've done for us. Don't forget they have their smooth sailing service plan. For more details about what all that includes, which includes some bonus money you can occur over a period of time towards a new system, but prioritize response to any issue that you have, inspections, all those things. Call them up at 865-299-2290. Ask them about their smooth sailing service plan. Check them out at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com, or you can visit them on Twitter at blueH2O_climate. That's going to do it for this edition of the Volquest.com podcast, the mailbag edition. Don't forget, we've got some other podcast stuff coming up starting next week. We'll have more on that. We had more in the war room about it. More details on that coming up this weekend. For Jesse Simonton, Rob Lewis, and Austin Price, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend, everybody.